Mr. President, a tax bill is a fiscal document, it is a legal document, it's also a moral document. It involves choices, much as we make choices as families. When we own a car that is unsafe, or a house that has a front step that is about to collapse, or a college student who needs money to pursue her education. A family can make choices. A parent can go to the casino and gamble and lose the money, or spend it on luxuries that are unnecessary or unwise. And nations make those kinds of moral choices as well. This tax document is a moral document. It involves choices, whether to make our country safer, rebuild our infrastructure and our national defense, or instead, in effect, squander resources, $1.5 trillion or more, on a giveaway to the very wealthiest in our country. And it relates directly to the tragedy that this nation experienced outside of Tacoma, Washington, just yesterday. I want to extend, first of all, my thoughts and prayers to those families and loved ones who have suffered losses. The deaths, 3 of them, and injuries have taken their toll emotionally as well as physically. And in these dark days, we are demanding answers, and fortunately, the National Transportation Safety Board is there beginning its investigation. We know now that that train apparently was traveling 3 times the limit on speed, 80 miles an hour, in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. That fact is absolutely stunning and scandalous, and the NTSB, no doubt, will present its results after its investigation. I call on the NTSB to finish that investigation as promptly and quickly as possible. As responsible an agency as it is, it often works much more slowly than taxpayers deserve. And so I call on it to produce this investigation, not in months or years, but in days and weeks, because we need to know the answers as to why this catastrophe occurred. We know with certainty, apparently now, that the train was traveling too fast. And you may be forgiven for thinking, this seems like deja vu. Didn't that happen also in Spite and Dival, where 4 people were lost? Didn't it happen in Philadelphia, where 8 were killed in 2015? And yes, again, 3 people were killed yesterday. 300 people have been killed in these accidents since 1970, when the NTSB first recommended that there be this new technology. It was new technology in 1970 called positive train control. Now it is old technology, but it still has not been implemented in 3/4 of the nation's railroads. And the deadline for installing it was postponed from 2015 over my vehement protests and others on our side of the aisle in the Commerce Committee and on the floor of the United States Senate, postponed until 2018, and now, even now, the railroads are seeking extensions of that time, saying The resources aren't available. Well, the costs of those 300 lives lost and of the crashes that have resulted from derailments and other kinds of very severe mishaps due to excessive speed are way in excess of the costs of installing positive train control since 1970, since 2015, and if it is postponed again, the costs will exceed the expenses of installing this system. It is available now. It is fully ready for installation on railroads across the country. The resources aren't preventing its installation. It is the will to do so and determination. The failure of federal authorities to require and provide support for positive train control is a moral choice this nation has made. It's not about only dollars and cents. It is about basic moral choices, and those choices are a factor in those 3 deaths outside of Tacoma, Washington. We know excessive speed was a factor. We know positive train control slows down trains when they're going too fast in zones where the limit is 30 miles an hour rather than the 80 miles an hour that train was traveling. Regardless of driver fatigue or distraction, regardless of any of the other contributing causes, positive train control is there to stop or slow down trains when human error may lead to crashes. The new deadline is now 1 year away, and if we do nothing else in this Congress, let us insist that that deadline be met without additional delay. Our failure to do so would be a moral failure. But the dollars and cents required to install positive train control and to repair our aging and decrepit roads and bridges involve investment. In Connecticut, we know, to show you what is happening in Connecticut, very much like the rest of the country, 78% of our roads are in poor or mediocre condition. That's a moral choice, not just a fiscal choice, and it has the same kinds of consequences as failure to install positive train control. The cost per motorist annually is $864 needed for vehicle repairs from driving on roads that are in disrepair. Now, as a result of this so-called tax cut, a lot of people in Connecticut are going to perhaps see a few crumbs, a few sweeteners, very minor reductions in their tax bill, nowhere near the $864 that they are now paying because of inadequate roads and bridges. That is a hidden cost. It is a moral choice because it not only creates costs in vehicle wear and tear, it also leads to crashes that in turn take lives and cause injuries. This legislation will put America in debt by $1.5 trillion. That's a moral choice because it shifts the burden of tax breaks and giveaways now to future generations. It also deprives us right now of funds that could be applied to infrastructure, rebuilding roads and bridges. And lest you think that Connecticut's situation is an anomaly or an exception, the grade for our nation as a whole in infrastructure is a resounding yes, D+. Now, I know it may seem to many of my colleagues like an oversimplification. Yes, it is. But it is an oversimplification with real facts that support it and real consequences to the American people. And when the President of the United States suggests in a tweet, as he did yesterday after the Tacoma tragedy, that his infrastructure program will be ready, quote, soon, end quote, that is ducking responsibility. And it is a moral choice because soon has meant delays month after month into the first year of his presidency. He can take action today. He can disavow the shameful program that he has supported, the tax cut that slashes resources for the federal government, and instead decide that investment is the right course here. Investment in roads, bridges, rail, broadband, VA facilities, ports, and airports. That's a moral choice that this tax scam makes. It's a tax scam with moral consequences in terms of inequality in this nation. It tilts benefits in favor of the wealthiest and corporations who receive permanent tax cuts. It will hurt working families, students, public schools, firefighters, police officers, local governments, and sick people who receive nothing but crumbs by comparison. And it will desperately hurt states like Connecticut. Our state and local taxes will no longer be deductible above set limits. $10,000 will barely cover, and in fact will fail to cover, many, many of the tax bills that formerly could be deducted. And it will impose limits on mortgage interest deductions that will harm our real estate industry in Connecticut and many other states across the country. Yes, there are crumbs and sweeteners, and they are temporary, and they pale in comparison to the tremendous benefits that will go to corporations and the wealthiest. It narrows our tax base, shifting the burden, in fact, from corporations to individuals who don't receive them. It makes tax codes more complicated, not less so. It grossly increases equality, and it steals $1.5 trillion from our children and from us insofar as it deprives our national defense as well as our infrastructure of resources that are needed. Now, I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee, and I remember very well the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, saying, the most significant threat to our national security is our national debt, which surprised me at the time. For the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to say, the biggest threat to our national security is our national debt, how could that be? Well, having watched the National Defense Authorization Act year after year, constrained by resources that are now going to be less available because of this $1.5 trillion debt that's created by this tax plan, and larger probably, I better understand what he meant. The Republicans are essentially pursuing two inherently irreconcilable objectives. The chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a man whom I respect as much as anybody in this chamber, has called for an additional $430 billion over the next 5 years to build up our military and rebuild it. I can tell you without doubt, there is no way to increase defense spending $86 billion every year, as the chairman has said we need, while slashing federal revenue $150 billion every year. The math fails. It will not work. And so for my Republican colleagues to say, we need to build, we need to invest in our national defense and in our military and in the skill training of our warriors is a fiction. It is blatant deception. And it is a disservice to the brave men and women who have enlisted and serve us in uniform now, and others who will join them in the future. We cannot have the most advanced and strongest military in the world if we use the same tax code as the Cayman Islands. This year, our country experienced a tragic loss of life. In fact, more than one loss of life, needlessly, preventably. 17 sailors perished on the USS John McCain and the USS Fitzgerald. 2 of them were from Connecticut. I attended ceremonies in their honor. Those deaths are attributable largely to lack of resources. There may have been other causes. But this tax bill is a moral choice about our military. The failure to invest in those ships, in the training and necessary rest that's required for our men and women in those positions will be aggravated by the debt that we see here. Our national security is more than just military spending. In the face of Russian cyber attacks in our elections, horrific hurricanes hitting Puerto Rico and Texas and Florida, fires still burning in western states, we know that our military alone is not enough to keep us safe and secure. Those natural disasters and those challenges from our adversary require investment as well. And again, the loss of this $1.5 trillion to debt that will be paid largely by future generations is something that hobbles our ability to make our nation safe and secure. This tax scam is reprehensible morally. It cuts taxes for the wealthiest while jeopardizing programs that are essential to the safety and security of many in our nation who are most vulnerable. Under current law, the GOP tax plan will trigger $25 billion in Medicare cuts next year alone. And with this self-inflicted $1.5 trillion hole in our federal deficit, we know what will come next: savage attacks on Social Security, as well as Medicaid and Medicare. This assault on health care doesn't end with these programs. The repeal of the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate will raise premiums and eventually lead to $13 million, 13 million more uninsured Americans. Republicans are sabotaging these critical programs that provide care to the most vulnerable Americans so that those at the top can avoid paying their fair share. And what corporations benefit the most? There is a very simple answer. The ones that benefit the most with foreign cash that will be distributed almost certainly to their shareholders and to their CEOs are listed right here. In the red are the foreign cash, and the total is listed as well. They are the ones who are going to benefit. Apple has been singled out as the single largest beneficiary, but many other corporations around the country will benefit as well. And the picture that I think was most powerful in assessing how these corporations will use this money occurred when the president's chief economic advisor asked a room of CEOs, how many of you will spend these additional resources on creating jobs? And there were no more than a few hands out of that room. This money will go to shareholders. And these corporations have zero incentive to provide new jobs if there is no increase in demand and sales. And the failure to provide real tax cuts, real benefits to middle-class families and to our working families means that sales and demand will not lead to more jobs because there will be no increase in demand with the crumbs and pittance tax cuts that are complicated. So Republicans, let me say finally, are borrowing $1.5 trillion, and they're putting it on a credit card. And sometimes pictures are worth 1,000 words. Here's the American Excess tax scam card. It won't buy you much because it's debt. American Excess, with apologies to American Express, sincere apology, the American Excess tax scam card can be used by our children, my children, your children, as a symbol of what they are losing. What they are losing, not only in the opportunity costs, the roads and bridges and rail that is unrepaired, the new schools and airports that are unbuilt, the national defense that becomes far less adequate because the investment can't be made, the government programs, whether it's Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, that are in peril, deeply in jeopardy because of this tax scam, and positive train control that can save lives, could have saved lives, in fact, in Tacoma when that train was traveling 80 miles an hour when the speed limit was 30. These opportunity costs are real. The choices to incur them are moral. And the debt that will have to be paid by future generation is equally real, and it is immoral. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.